to the past 3 weeks. But yeah, Alex, welcome. Before we start, everybody, welcome to Life the Complete Story. I'm your host, Tyler, joined by my lovely co-host, Alex. And we'd like to encourage you to follow us on Spotify at Life the Complete Story, YouTube at Life the Complete Story, Instagram and Facebook at Life Complete Story, as well as TikTok. And email us your questions at lifecompletestory@gmail.com.
Yes, sir.
And
Okay.
we will now start how we always do, Alex. We got our nature in the news.
Yes, sir. This one looks like a cool one today.
I'm doing good. 2 weeks in a row, I've read the article besides just picking it out.
Yes,
So,
sir.
This article is the AI that writes climate-friendly cement recipes in seconds. So if you don't know, the cement production industry makes up about 8% of the global CO2 emission.
It is
which 8% doesn't seem like a lot, but that's more than like the entire aerospace industry.
Yeah, it is. And when you think about how much construction is always going on around the world and how much of it uses concrete, especially in your developed countries, where I was just at today for work, they've been working on a massive bridge for the past couple years, and they're not even close to done yet. All they've got poured is the pillars, and they're probably 400 feet tall at least. Massive bridge.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of concrete, and that's the thing. You can pour a lot of concrete in a short amount of time, and it doesn't seem like much, but it is.
When you're thinking of concrete and CO2 emissions that come from, there's like two different like paths it takes. So the path A is the production to make what is called the clinker, which is the crushed up limestone that goes into making cement. And you need a massive amount of heat to do that. You'll need some type of coal-fired generator or something of the sort to reach that superheated
sort of fossil fuel, just because of the amount of heat that it generates. And traditionally it's always been coal because it's cheap, readily available. I'm sure in recent years, as they're building or upgrading, they may be switching to natural gas, but
that still burns CO2.
Yeah, it still gives off CO2 as it burns.
And the second path is the CO2 that is released from the actual production of clinker. So limestone is the main ingredient, right? And limestone is calcium carbonate, right?
Yeah.
In its simplest form. So whenever you make this clinker, you're releasing CO2 from that calcium carbonate, and that's going up into the atmosphere. And that's the bulk of the CO2 in the cement making process is. So what we're doing here is we're creating an AI model that kind of throws together all the things that make cement and is trying to find a new recipe that doesn't need as much limestone. And the way this is beneficial is we're using an AI and it's running a whole bunch of models rather than us running these tests separately and testing each recipe in a kitchen or something like that and seeing what works, what doesn't, and testing CO2 levels. That's running a model that's able to tell us without having to actually run the production. So we're not actually throwing any extra CO2 in by testing this. We're just running it in a simulation.
Yeah, and I mean, there have been attempts in the past to maybe refine the concrete recipe, but the biggest problem with it is when you start changing things, you start losing strength in a lot of cases. It's a very specific mix. The mixture has been what it is for so long because it is, from what they've been able, at least as of now, to determine, that's the strongest mixture with the least amount of materials that they've been able to figure out as of now. So if they're able to use this to really improve that mixture and keep the strength, that's the key part of it, is maintaining the strength.
Yeah, and there's things that we've done currently that have already started to help reduce the limestone and CO2 emissions. We've used slag from iron production and what's called fly ash, which is a byproduct of coal burning plants.
Is that it's the slag's probably in lieu of gravel, I'm guessing. So
I'd assume
to mine so much rock when you already have it, basically.
Yeah, so they're using that as those byproducts from other industrial productions to to make concrete. But the global demand for cement outweighs the amount of slag and fly ash that we produce.
Yeah. There's just so much that is, and it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah. So they're using a modeling software known as GEMS, GEMS, and that's how they're kind of running all these models and testing all these recipes and simulations and stuff. And so far, it doesn't look like they've cracked the code per se on a brand new recipe, but I'm sure they're getting
They're
closer.
getting there, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the amount of work that they can do using AI is vast, so much faster than what,
because just the amount of time it would take to run. I'm sure they've run thousands of models already. At least each one's a different combination, whether it's just increasing ratios or changing ingredients altogether. So running those each individually would take how many hours in themselves?
Yeah,
and use how many resources?
And to a lot of the historic testing would have been like actually making the concrete, mixing it, pouring it, letting it set, and then you test it. And I mean, that takes time and resources.
Yeah. And I'm not going to preach politics or anything on the podcast here, but I'm not the biggest fan of AI. I do know it has its uses, but this is something that I think is very useful with AI.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that I'm not a huge fan of with it, but I won't get into that here. And I'm sure you agree to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good use of it. Stuff like this is kind of what it was really, at least initially, designed for, using these models to test things that take weeks, months, even years to test. And of course, as you start getting further away, even in traditional testing, you get variables that you just can't calculate for.
Right. But that's going to do it for today's Nature in the News. Not quite a nature article in the news, but relates in some capacity.
We like to mix it up a little bit.
More climate change and emissions based. But that'll do it for our Nature in the News. We'll get into our lesson for the day. Well, Alex, what are we talking about today?
Today, we are talking about the stomaforms. So these are your deep sea ray finned fish. They have a very diverse morphology, pretty wide range. They go all the way from the dragonfish to the lightfish to the loose jaws hatchetfish to the viperfish. So these are, when you think of a lot of the real crazy looking deep sea fish, this is where a lot of them belong. So there's 410 species and 50 genera, which all fall into 4 separate families. Most of them, of course, live within the bathypelagic zone, or the mesopelagic zone, that deep open water, ranging from the subtropics to even up into the Antarctic waters. So they pretty much everywhere that deep water is found, because once you get to a certain depth, there's not a whole lot of variation as far as things like temperature, which are typically a big factor in where different species live.
The temperature is just cold.
Yeah, it's typically, once you get to that depth, it's a constant 4 degrees Celsius, because that is the densest, the most dense that liquid water is. That's the temperature. Once you start getting colder than that, it becomes less dense and starts to become ice. That's why ice floats, because it's less dense than liquid water. And then as you get warmer than that, it also becomes less dense, because the molecules of water start to excite more and move around. So that's why it stays at nice constant temperature, because that's where all that, the water of that temperature just kind of all falls to the bottom and just stays there. And at that depth, you don't get any sunlight. So it's not like the only thing that could warm the water up is like hydrothermal vents or underwater volcanoes, things like that. But the smallest of species within the stomaforms is the bristlemouth. Those are only about half an inch, 0.6 of an inch, or about 1.5 centimeters. So relatively small. And then the largest species is the barbelled dragonfish, which can grow up to 20 inches long. So overall, these family of fish are relatively small, and that goes, of course, with where they live. When it's deep ocean like that, there's not a lot of food. So you kind of, most of them are limited in their size. Most of them, as you can see from the picture that Tyler's pulled up here, are very unusual, kind of nightmare-y appearance, with typically a lot of premaxillary and maxillary teeth. So you can see in the picture here, they got a lot of big teeth. Many of the members have cycloid scales, which are a bit more delicate, or they're completely scaleless.
I don't know the benefit that has.
I mean, it's one of those probably at that depth with how little you meet other things, and everything has pretty to kind of put it into some video game terms. Everything put all its points into attack basically, because most of the deep sea species like this look fairly similar in the sense that they've got very big mouths and a lot of sharp teeth. So it's one of those, at that point, it's not worth putting any effort into defensive measures like having the scales, because everything is just powers right through it.
Yeah. Or if it just takes that much more energy to produce the scales.
That as well. A lot of them are typically darker in color, a lot of browns, blacks, some silvers. And a lot of them actually have what are called photophores, which are little light emitting organs.
You can kind of see it in the image too.
Yeah, in the image that
along the
ventral surface,
the ventral side. Yeah. Little dots on the body.
Yeah. Many times, as you can see, the teeth are pretty transparent, non-reflective, so that way they avoid being detected because of the use of those photophores. You don't want that little bit of light that's emitted to reflect off your teeth and give you away. Typically, the stomaforms will undergo a daily migration, so they'll stay deeper during the day, and then as the sun sets, they tend to rise a bit more towards the surface, because as you get closer to the top of the water, you get more stuff to eat. So that those bio-rich shallow waters is where they like to feed, but a lot of times the larger members will stay in the deeper water and feed on those kind of slow, sluggish members of this group that are making that trek up and down each day. So they kind of pick them off now as their bellies are full and they're tired. Typically, they spawn in deep water, but will hatch in the shallows due to their eggs being very buoyant. So they'll lay their eggs and they'll kind of float to the surface, float and hatch in shallower water, and then live that first little bit of their life in the shallow water where food's readily available, and then start to make their way deeper into the depths.
Right. So our first family of the day is going to be Gonostomatidae. These guys are the bristle mouths, lightfish, and angle mouths. These guys are more mesopelagic, so they live still in that deep water, but not as more, not in the abyssal zone like some of the other ones. There's 8 genera holding 32 species within this family. Though they lack in the biodiversity, these are some of the most abundant species within the. That's just creepy.
Yeah, that's a bristle mouth.
Yeah, these are some of the more abundant species within not just the order we're talking about, but within the oceans in general. They are protandrous, which means they are hermaphroditic, and a lot of fish exhibit this. One of the most common examples would be a clownfish, but they sequentially are male, so they're born male, and if they need to become a female later in life, they will do whatever the process is to become a female.
Yes, that is very much most notably in the clownfish. They're kind of the representative species for when you talk about that.
The members of this group have large jaws, which allow them to catch prey much larger than themselves. As you can kind of see in the image that Alex pulled up, these guys are able to not open their mouth as wide as a group we'll talk about a little bit later, but they do have a large mouth in comparison to the overall width of the rest of their body. And it's believed that the lower jaw is incapable of chewing, so it kind of just swallows its food tail first. And they feed mostly on zooplankton and smaller crustaceans, although sometimes they are opportunistic feeders and will feed on other fish.
So next, I already got a picture pulled up. I'm ready for it. I'm ready. Our next group that we're talking about is Sternoptichidae. Yeah. Sternoteichidae, sorry. So these are the marine hatchetfish, bottle lights, pearl sides, and constellation fish. So they're not related to the freshwater hatchetfish of the Charcariforms. I believe we've talked about those already.
Yeah, that would be your piranha family.
Yes. So these guys are found at depths of 200 to 600 meters in tropical, subtropical, and temperate waters in the three major oceans. So that'd be the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian, I believe. And they range from about 1.1 to 4.7 inches. Pretty relatively small.
Hey, say 4 inches is plenty.
Moving on. They have fully developed pseudobranchs, which is a structure in the first gill arch that is believed to supply highly oxygenated blood to the eyes, which you can see in a lot of these fish. They either have very large eyes or very small eyes. They either have big eyes so that way they can gather as much of the almost completely absent light as they can to see, or they just kind of forgo that and have very small eyes and use their other senses. They also have pre-opercular spines that are found between the cheek and the gill covers, so making them not as easy of a meal as some of the others. As I said,
which comes to the advantage. These guys are pretty small.
Yeah. As I said, those large eyes collect faint amounts of light and they can focus well on close and far objects. So they have very well developed eyes. And little is known about their life cycle, mostly because they are a deep water group. Believe that they may be short-lived, dying no more than after like a year, not much more than a year. So relatively short-lived fish. They don't get very big. You can kind of see why they're called hatchet fish just from their shape. If you ever seen like a hatchet, like a little axe that kind of have that, their tail's almost like the handle and their body's like the head of the axe. But that moves us into our next group.
Yeah, this group has the least amount of information that I could find for us today. This is going to be Phocichthidae. These guys are known as the light fish. They are smaller fish, going no more than 10 centimeters. And similar to hatchetfish, and the other group we talked about, the Gonostomatidae, these guys make up for their small size with mass abundance, accounting for nearly 85% of mass in all mesopelagic species.
The quantity over quality.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Again, this is a quality species too.
Yeah.
There's just not as many different types of them.
Yes.
So I assume the species that you've pulled up for us lives kind of in the Mediterranean area.
Yes.
Gotcha. That'll bring us to our last group for the day. This has kind of been a shorter episode for us, but that no worries.
I've got a great picture for this. You're gonna love it.
Awesome. Look at that viperfish.
Yes, sir. So our last group of the day is the family Stomidae. These are apex predators of the deep sea. As you can see, they have very large jaws with fang-like teeth. They're able to hinge their jaws up to 100 degrees, so quite large, quite wide, allowing them to consume very large prey, up to about 50% greater than their length. So big stuff. They exhibit a very strong sexual dimorphism, which means that typically one of the sexes is noticeably different than the others. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. In these fish, the females are often much larger than the males, to the point where I don't know if this is where almost I don't know if we'll talk about anglerfish soon, but it's
not quite to that extent.
Okay, not quite to that extent. But the males often will lack teeth, a functioning gut, and pelvic fins in the larval stages. The males tend to have much larger eyes with more photophores, so that allows them to see females from further away. But it seems like overall the males really their whole purpose is to reproduce and die, and the females are the ones that live longer. And they tend to be pretty small, ranging from only about 15 to 26 centimeters.
Yeah, we have a little bit until we talk about anglerfish, Alex. Would you like to explain what the variation between sexual dimorphism for anglerfish?
Yeah, so anglerfish, which as Tyler said, are not closely related to the fish we've talked about today, but they're similar. They're another deep sea fish species. They're a group, I guess, a group of fish.
Those
Okay, of course they are. Yeah, but their sexual dimorphism is pretty extreme, to the point where when you look up a picture, almost always going to be a female. The females are the larger ones. They have the little light on the front with a very large mouth with big teeth. The males are teeny tiny, to the point where what they will do is actually, when they find a female, they will attach to it and basically live off of the female, almost like a parasite, to the point where they basically just degrade into nothing but a pair of testes. And their whole,
Yeah,
at that point, they literally just become a parasitic reproducer.
yeah, it's a parasitic reproductive organism.
Yeah, at that point, it's pretty extreme. Most other fish and a lot of other things really don't exhibit it to that point, but that's just something cool that when I was talking about this, it made me think of it just because of that. But that's really all we have for our fish today. So we will go into our next segment, which is our amazing species. Tyler has a doozy for us today. Kind of a
I
sad one
do.
today, but
So recently, as of how long ago was this? Earlier this week, the final male northern white rhino. I apologize. I thought the species went completely extinct. No, it's functionally extinct, which means that for all, basically, there's the last male has died. So there are 7 individuals left, I believe. That's the number. But they're all female. So with that being said, there's no way for them to reproduce. The last male has passed. So today we're talking about Ceratotherium simium, which is the white rhinos. These guys used to live all throughout Central Africa, from Sudan all the way down to the tip of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and they live in Kenya right now in a wildlife refuge, I believe.
yeah.
So
And
these guys,
like I said, there's only females left. They live relatively long. Would it say a generation? Does it say?
the
It's about,
generation length is 15 years.
yeah. So that it takes them that long to become mature adults, and they live much longer than that, of course. But with only females remaining, it's just a matter of time until, unfortunately, this species is completely extinct,
Yes.
unless somehow they are able to do some.
There are private private companies that are capable if they choose to. But who knows? So we'll give you the rundown of the IUCN's 2020 report for the northern white rhino. Had obviously critically endangered at this point in time. This was back in January 2020. So there was the northern and the southern white rhino at that point in time. There still is the northern white rhino. They are, I believe, more populous. And at the time of this report, there were 2 mature individuals in the wild, I believe. I don't know much about the species the more I'm digging in and researching it.
Yeah.
But the only confirming wild subpopulation was in the Garamba National Park, which is in the DRC. And in 2003, the northern white rhino populations declined from 30 down to 4, which was due to poaching and mostly poaching. Back in 1960, there was believed to be about 2,000, upwards of 2,000 wild individuals. However, based off of foot surveys, that number had decreased tremendously over the time. The last 4 potential breeding northern white rhinos in captivity were moved to Kenya, which, Alex, if you can pull up the map from the IUCN red list, that would be
I will do so.
the blue area on the map would be where that wildlife refuge is. And the red area is the possible extinct area. The surveys came back inconclusive in those areas, but the dark red areas with no stripes, that is where it is confirmed to be extinct. There have been no sightings. As we said, the generation length is about 15 years. That, as Alex said, that's the length it takes for a newborn rhino to reach sexual maturity. They're mainly used. Their main threat would be poaching and hunting and trapping. So that would be for their ivory and their ivory, keratin,
Ivory of
ivory
their
in their
horns,
horns.
yeah.
Yeah.
So doing a little research, the last male died back in 2018, so maybe it may have been they just now recently announced that it's functionally extinct.
Yeah, I don't know. I just saw something online and I was like puzzled.
Yeah.
I thought, yeah, I might have been wrong. Oh well. Still a necessary thing to talk about. There's only a couple left.
Yes.
But with that being said, most of it is due to hunting and poaching for the ivory in their horns. That ivory is a very valuable resource within the world trade for various jewelries and a lot of other things, as well as like Eastern medicine uses that in some things. Not really Eastern, more African medicine, I'd say, right?
Yeah, more than likely.
Like witch doctory stuff, which I don't really like to use that term,
Yeah.
but it's what it is. As well as them being a large trophy animal
Yes.
for sport hunters. And I believe the remaining individuals are under constant guard.
Yes, they are. I mean, and that is maybe one thing that in Africa they have done their best with, and they've been fairly effective with it so far, and that is to protect some of these like critically endangered species. With their on reserves, they have rangers day and night patrolling the preserves, making sure that that poachers aren't entering and hunting, trying to kill these critically endangered animals.
Yeah, so in the conservation actions tab for the IUCN, they're stating that any conservation for this would be dependent on successful assisted reproduction techniques. So they've collected basically eggs, the oocytes from the 2 surviving females, and have sperm cells from 5 of the past males.
Yeah, and looking at it, I think the big problem that there is because the 2 remaining females were both the daughter and granddaughter of the male that died back in 2018.
Okay.
It unfortunately had gotten, I guess, to the point where they've reached that genetic bottleneck where, I mean, could they reproduce? Technically, yes, but it is not. It's not good for if an individual is born from it. It's not usually a very healthy individual, and
No.
it's said here. Now, I'm not sure if it's just because they are getting older or what it is, but just a little bit I've seen, a little bit of research I did just from some quick googling, saying that both the 2 surviving white rhinoceros cannot carry a pregnancy. So I'm not sure if that is something along the lines of they've reached an age where they can't. They've
I believe
sickness,
that's the reasoning to it.
and that's probably why they've finally been declared functionally extinct.
Yeah. But there's still, like, if you can create an embryo, like not an artificial, but if you can do like IVF and create like an embryo using the sperm from the one of the 5 males and one of the eggs from these 2 surviving individuals, you can plant that into a southern white rhino to be the surrogate.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of the current work is being done. Is
Yeah, the
that
problem here is now you're just trying to create a surviving embryo, and it's difficult, and you have a limited number of resources before you're just out of
yeah
eggs or the or just gametes in general. That says you don't want to just keep pumping them out until you like almost guaranteed a success.
yeah
But that's all I have. I kind of want to like every once in a while, like I like to like shed a little bit of light on like how humans have kind of like brought something to the brink, and a
yeah
lot of times it's not for the better.
no.
But that's gonna do it for today's amazing species. Alex, what do you have for us today?
So today, for our most wanted, we are talking about the Nile perch. So another fish from the National Invasive Species Information Center as part of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This fish, native, of course, to the Nile in Africa, was introduced elsewhere in Africa, Lake Victoria, which is, I believe, the largest lake in Africa.
Yeah, watch the big one in the what is it, the Rift Valley or whatever.
Yeah, back in the 90s, and it has destroyed 200 native species of fish because it is a voracious predator, as well as it just outcompeted the other fish for food through their own predation. And it has been introduced into Texas as
What?
of the mid 1970s as kind of as a sport fish. So far, it's still controlled from what they're reporting. But if it is such a voracious predator that it can just kind of take off and outcompete a lot of other fish species, then it could very quickly become worse. It is on the World Conservation Union's invasive species specialist group as one of the world's 100 worst invasive species. So not good. I know in reading here in Australia, in the state of Queensland, they have in place heavy fines on anyone found in possession of a living Nile perch because of how much it outcompetes the native barramundi fish. The other reason why it's such a problem is it can get pretty big, almost
Huge.
about 2 meters, which is
Huge.
like 6 feet 7 inches long. So they get quite large.
Which is odd because when you think of a perch, I think of like European perch species that are like yay big.
Yeah, or
And
the
like
perch we catch in America in like lakes, like the yellow perch, which is about that big.
yay big.
Yeah.
I did some research. The last known caught Nile perch in Texas was in 1992. So it's believed to have died out from cold.
Okay. Well, that may be. It's not a bad thing.
It's for the better.
Yes, it is considered a part of the megafauna, I guess, just because it does get so large for a freshwater fish, which is why it is an issue. But apparently, in its native range, it is actually declining in a lot of cases. One of those weird. That's not the first time we've talked about an invasive species like that either, where it's invasive elsewhere, but in its native range, it is not doing so hot.
Yeah, it's weird. We talked about something not too long ago like that. I forget what it was. It was
I-
some other fish species.
I forget it as well.
Was it the Asian carp?
I think it might have been that one catfish. I do forget.
The comments will let us know if they get this far.
Yes, it is used a lot in aquaculture. It's a very popular food fish in its native range because it has a lot higher of a fat content than the native cichlids that a lot of the folks would eat. But like a lot of the Nile, deforestation, soil erosion, desertification has done a lot of damage to the Nile and thus these fish. It's kind of wild.
All right, Alex, that leaves us with one last segment for the day.
Yes, sir.
And we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier in the day. Today, we are going to talk about sexual dimorphism.
Yes.
for our ecology encyclopedia entry for the day. If you do not know, sexual dimorphism, as we talked earlier, is when one species, not one species, when one gender within a species is vastly different than another. Alex, pull up a
Yes.
nice image for us.
So a lot of the easy ones that a lot of people notice are like those the cervids in the deer family, because the males grow those big antlers, kind of show off. They fight with each other. In this case, and it shows up in many different ways. Like it's not just like the image I pulled up where one is larger than the others, although that does happen. Things like that, like the growing of antlers, or even if both sexes grow antlers, typically the males tend to be a lot more impressive. Or even major changes, like you can see down here in this bottom left corner of the rhinoceros beetle. The female really doesn't have anything going on, but the male has that massive rostrum that it uses to fight with other males. We talked about the salmon last week, the sockeye salmon, where the males get that really bright pinkish red and their jaws get really large. And then in other cases, like in the say, like we talked about rhinoceros today, elephants, a lot, kind of a cool thing, one conservation thing, but also kind of a genetic thing that has happened is many female elephants, especially in Africa, have now kind of evolved, quote unquote, to no longer have tusks because of poaching and other things. Many female elephants do not have tusks anymore. At least the wild ones you'll see. However, a lot of cases, the females do tend to be larger than the males. It's not a ton, but the only issue is the males still have tusks. And they're thinking, they've done some genetic testing with it, and they're thinking that there's some sort of genetic thing that causes the male embryos to die in utero if they do not have the gene to grow tusks.
Interesting.
So, good thing for poaching, maybe bad thing genetically for the species. Kind of a little early to tell, because obviously there are still males being born with tusks. So, who knows kind of where it comes from. And you see here also, like, it goes both ways. As I was saying, there are species where the females are much larger, like we talked about the anglerfish earlier. Different reptiles,
There's a
amphibians.
dragonfish in the image you have.
Yeah, there's a dragonfish in this image. Spiders, one that's super notable, the black widow. The females are much larger than the males, and they're the ones that have that distinctive hourglass on the abdomen. Ticks, female ticks are typically much larger than the males, and they're the ones that tend to have especially for around us, the deer tick, they're the ones that have the bright red abdomen. And it shows, and they're in a lot of species also where there is no sexual dimorphism. They all look pretty much the same. So it's an evolutionary advantage in some cases, but also a disadvantage, because you get a lot of times that whatever sex is the one, it tends to be a lot more showy. I think like the northern cardinal in America, the males are a very bright red. They're very easy to spot. That also makes them a much more noticeable prey.
Yeah, and the species doesn't have to have a size difference to have that coloration difference.
Correct.
Like Alex said, the cardinal is a good example. They're relatively equal sized between the male and the female. The male might be a little bit larger based off of the plumage and whatever, but something similar would be like a bird of paradise or a parrot, some tropical birds, where they use that more as a mating ritual, like where the peacock is a good example.
Yes.
The males have the big fan of feathers, where the females, the peafowl, are more hen-like, chicken-like.
Yeah,
and
the peahen, peafowl is the generic term for the species.
you know what, Alex?
And I had to. But Yeah, I mean, you can see the turkey. That's another one that does kind of the same thing. The males tend to be larger, more colorful. They fan out than the big tail fan. But it's one of those evolutionary things where some species evolved it because it for mostly for competition, really, between the whatever sex is the pretty one, quote unquote. And typically, when you see that, you see things where like the one sex will mate more often. So if you say like with deer, whoever is the dominant male deer is the one who gets to mate with most of the females. This go like lions are the same way. You have the dominant male lion is the one who mates with most of the females. So that's where a lot of start getting into that kind of harem activity, especially in some of the mammals. That's where that sexual dimorphism really is noticeable. And it does go the other way as well. Typically not as much, but it does. Or like the same time, you get some that are pretty similar. Like I said, trying to think of a good one. Like a lot of birds of prey, they look pretty much the same. It's almost impossible to tell the difference between a male and a female eagle, like bald eagle, because they look almost the same. The females may be a little bigger, or the male may be a little bigger, but at a glance, hard to tell.
Cetaceans?
Yeah, yeah, whales, dolphins. Again, very almost impossible to tell the difference. Sharks, female sharks may tend to be a bit bigger, but so that's really all I have on this. I just kind of wanted to talk about it since we brought it up earlier. And this is definitely something that you're going to see a lot more once we move into the reptiles and birds, and then eventually the mammals. This is something that becomes a bit more prominent.
Yeah, not as apparent in amphibians,
No,
surprisingly.
no,
Maybe just like a bull. The male bullfrog is larger than the female,
yeah,
and that's really the only example I can think of.
yeah. I mean, there's really not much color difference. The male bullfrog may be a little more green. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
but
that, that
that's gonna
that's all we got for today.
that's gonna do it for our ecology encyclopedia. Once again, guys, if you could help us out a little bit, please give us a follow on Spotify at Life the Complete Story, YouTube at Life the Complete Story, TikTok and Instagram at Life Complete Story, Facebook at Life the Complete Story. And if you have any questions, facts, anything you want to share with us that doesn't quite fit in that comment block, please be sure to send it to lifecompletestory at gmail.com. We love to hear what you guys have to say. If you guys want anything special out of us, we will try our best to make it happen for you.
Yes,
But
sir.
once again, I've been Tyler. That's been Alex.
And as always, keep on learning. Learn something new. You never know what you find interesting. But thank you all for joining us for another episode of Life the Complete Story, and we will see you next time.